How's it going? I'm Damon Edwards. Just so you know, all these slides are already, if you see out there, my @Damon Edwards, my Twitter handle, they're already posted there. So I go kind of fast, so if you don't have to take notes, they're already there. They're pinned to the top of my account. I currently co-founder of a company called Rundeck, but before that I was managing partner of an operations and DevOps consulting company called DTO Solutions. Been heavily involved in the DevOps community from the early days and really kind of recognized SRE early on as something that a lot of our clients that we're working with were trying to adopt. And this has kind of been percolating, just like DevOps kind of did. It sort of was bouncing around in different forms before it kind of crystallized. The same thing has happened with SRE, right? Sort of thing that's kind of sprung to life. Of course, Google put their stake in it first with the name, but you saw a lot of companies were already kind of driving towards these ideas. And there's a series of books. Actually, the latest one that came out called Seeking SRE. It's the non-Google SRE book from Raleigh. I wrote a chapter in that. Some of this is based on what is in that. It's a good book. It's a collection of essays. But you'll see this kind of idea of SRE popping up everywhere. And for a lot of companies now, it's like, well, this sounds great, right? These other companies are achieving these faster, better, faster, cheaper results with their operations. We should give this a try. And oh, by the way, Google did it, right? So, but generally, it kind of goes something like this, right? Where somebody says, well, hey, we have a bunch of systems administrators now, right? What if we call them SREs, right? Isn't that going to be great? We'll call them SREs. We'll tell them they should learn how to code a little bit. Everything's going to be great. It's going to be wonderful, right? But the reality is, it looks a lot like this, right? Where they come in, following up on Josh's, Dilbert slides. And it says, congratulations, your new title is now SRE. You guys should write code and be better at ops, and it should make everything better. And right, and they're kind of still drowning in all of the process and all of the culture and the ways, or I guess drowning, more like entombed in the old ways of thinking and working, and nothing really changes, right? And eventually, if you talk about sort of the old classic kind of, bad version of operations, right, that we're always overloaded, it's constant firefighting, waiting in ticket queues, things break, they break again, and for good measure, they break one more time. Everyone's busy, stuff's not really getting done. The executive view is, everything's taking too long, costing too much, and breaking too often. And with these new bestowed SRE titles, guess what we have? The exact same thing, right? Everything's still taking too long, costing too much, and breaking too often. And just anointing in the team, the SRE team, right? Or saying add some new skills, right? So let's put kind of software development mindset into our systems administrators. Doesn't make them SREs, right? What really sets SRE apart, and what's kind of very fascinating about it, is it's a rethinking of kind of how operations works. And if you kind of talk to a lot of the early proponents of SRE and sort of why they came up with a name like site reliability engineering, because they didn't want to be confused with classic operations, right? They wanted to redefine from the ground up to say, if we're going to build not only high-scale systems, highly available systems, but also a high-velocity organization to manage those systems, what do we have to change? What has to be different? And what's fascinating is there's these three principles that behind, I guess we call it the Google flavor of SRE. I think a lot of people are zeroing in on. And they're very interesting because they're radical departure to a lot of current operations thinking, right? So, number one, SRE needs service level objectives with consequences. A lot of the SRE crowd will say, without this, you don't have SRE. So what do they mean, right? Service level objective, don't they mean service level agreement? And they actually don't. So they say a service level objective is different than a service level agreement because a service level agreement is a commitment by operations to do something in which operations suffers the penalty, right? To say, oh, well, we agree to this many nines, and if that's broken, that's on us. Instead, they say, well, let's have something new called a service level objective, and that is for any given service level indicator, we're going to get together with the business and with development and with operations, and we're going to figure out what is the business acceptable objective, right? What is that level of service for whatever measure that business will accept? And they'll say that's a service level objective. Anything above that, between the service level objective and perfection, is what they'll call the error budget, right? ERROR, not AIR, some people mistakenly think. And that idea is that we want to actually get just a little bit above that service level objective and then use the rest of that as a budget to say, let's experiment, let's try to go faster, let's try new things. And that error budget is to be used kind of by the organization. But what's fascinating about this is that it's really a tool for shared responsibility, right? Because they say, all right, well, ops, biz, development, we all have to agree that operations is the point of this business. We operate software as some kind of revenue-producing service for a living, so we have to say that, this is what our operational, these capabilities, or operation standards are what we have to adhere to. And what I mean by shared responsibility is if this air budget gets blown, right? If they start to fall below that service level objective, the consequences part in the principle was that it's actually on everybody, right? So if that means we're going to stop feature development, right? And we have to swarm to this problem, then the business has to be okay with that, right? So that's a very fascinating kind of first idea, is that it's not just operations responsibility, that if that air budget is blown, it's everyone's responsibility to stop and fix it, compared to a lot of traditional organizations where if you tell them, oh no, we're not going to launch new features, right? Well, the business would come down, like a ton of bricks because, the quarter, blah, 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 we have to do this. The reality is it's a shared responsibility model. It's a very different mindset from kind of what you see in traditional operations. Number two, SREs have time to make tomorrow better than today. So this is that idea of toil that Jane had mentioned. It's very fascinating because it's a name for a problem that I think we've all felt in our careers. And I think Vivek Rao from Google, I thought he did a great job of describing it. It says, toil is the kind of work tied to running a production system that tends to be manual, right? It's repetitive, automatable, or should be automated, stuff the computers are good at. It's tactical and devoid of enduring value, which I think is huge. It's like the work we're doing that's not adding value to the company, and it scales linearly as the service grows. If we have 1 million users today and we want to have 1 million users, tomorrow, do we need, 1,000 more people to run this? And the idea is that the toil, it's not adding value to what we're doing. It may be necessary, right? It may be something we have to do today to stay in business, but it should feel a bit dirty, right? It should feel like it's something that we're doing over and over again, and we always want to strive with that mindset of finding a way to get rid of that. I think that's been a traditional sort of operational mindset, is trying to fix the things that bug you over and over again. But the real kind of genius of the SRE side is saying we really want to focus on this toil because we really want to encourage the opposite of that, which is engineering work, right? So work that builds enduring value, it's creative, it takes the human brain to do something about it, it's strategic, right? It enables scaling of our organization, and importantly requires that human creativity, right? So the genius is to say, well, what we're going to do as an organization, we have to realize that we have to set limits on how much toil that we're going to accept as an organization. Again, not one person's responsibility, but as an organization, because that engineering work time that we need to have is useful for two things. One, improving the business, but number two, reducing that toil, keeping that toil at bay so we can get the most out of our people, the most out of our expensive humans. Because otherwise what happens, and you see this in a lot of kind of the classic sort of dump things on operations mindset, is that the toil crowds out all of that time to get the engineering work done. We have no time to improve the business, and most importantly, no time to reduce that toil, meaning we're kind of in engineering bankruptcy, where we're in this tailspin, we can never get out of it because we don't have enough time to fix it. So if you hear about, kind of what the, let me just kind of skip through quick. So in this idea of making tomorrow better than today, what you'll hear is, SRE teams will set what they call a toil limit, to say there's a certain threshold of like kind of the canonical one is 50%. Say no more than 50% of any given team's time will be spent on toil, right? Now it doesn't mean that if suddenly they're at 70%, that they can just kind of ignore the rest. It just means that's an indication that we have to swarm as an organization to figure out how do we bring that down? How do we help them climb out of that hole to where they can achieve some balance, to where they can spend the majority of their time on that engineering work driving the business forward. Whoa. Lost my microphone there. So the third one is, the SRE teams need to have the ability to regulate their workload. And this one kind of blows people's minds because it's the idea that really SRE is not a right? Or operations is not a right. And if you see in a lot of these organizations that adhere to this, they'll say, well, going to production, they'll actually put that in the hands of the delivery teams and say, now, of course, they give them the right platforms, the right tools around it, but they'll say that, you carry the pager. You have the responsibility. You go ahead and launch your product. Now, they'll have operational readiness type reviews, but they'll say, we'll bed some operations people on those teams, but handing control or handing the maintenance off to an operations team is something that's actually, the operations team has to accept that. So they can set the criteria, And again, if we start blowing those error budgets, we don't have the stability, they can push control back to the delivery team. So you guys are wearing the pager again, right? Now, in reality, you talk to people working that model, it rarely ever happens, but it's still a threat that makes it real. It says the developers have to come to the table and they have to agree on what the standards are and work to those standards. Otherwise, the responsibility goes back towards the left and not towards the operations organization. So if you compare that to a classic mindset, which is there's a date and development testing is going to go right up as close as possible to that date, and then suddenly it's operations responsibility to catch that thing and make it happen by that date. Under this model, that operations team has the right to say, no, this thing isn't ready, and push back on it, either delaying the date, which the business has to accept, or pushing back control to development and saying, we have the common framework, we have the common tooling, you guys stay up all night taking care of this thing. You can't push that kind of work onto our organization. So it's a fascinating, really it's a very different mindset and approach to operations. This is why they picked a different name for it. It's a much more self-regulating way of thinking about operations. And there's a great presentation by Stephen Thorne at the DevOps Enterprise Summit that really kind of rolls through all these principles and gives you examples of them. So enterprise, right? It's like where to start, right? We got these 3 ideas. There's a problem here, right? Number 1, this idea that we have service level objectives with consequences, that we can stop the line and change and force development or business to change what they're doing to swarm to operational problems. That's a company-wide cultural change. It's pretty hard to do, right? So even though that might be the key principle, the key flag to hold in SRE, that's a very hard place to start. The idea of doing a company-wide culture change to let SRE or let operations reject things, let them kind of control their own workload, also very difficult to do without kind of wide-scale buy-in. So the one that I think I've seen organizations be most successful starting with is this idea of reducing toil, right? This is the one where really everybody wins. Helping teams figure out how to make tomorrow better than today by getting rid of that toil. So why focus on getting rid of toil? Number 1, you can lots of value independent of SRE, right? So you don't have to use the words SRE at all. You can just say, look, who doesn't want more time, right? Don't we want twice as much capacity out of our organization? So you can kind of sneak the SRE ideas in there without having to sell this bigger idea. Then you can build from there. And it's pretty logical. Your people are your most expensive assets, right? How do we stay out of their way, right? So on the delivering planned operations work, right? How do we stop this kind of bouncing from one ticket queue to another ticket queue to another ticket queue, right? Staying out of people's way so they can get things done that they need to get done. Also, when it comes to incident response, right? How do we make those loops tighter and tighter, giving them the right instrumentation, investing in the collaboration, the right investigatory tools. There's a whole idea called 5 minutes. 4 minutes. Okay, so a whole idea called observability that's coming up now. That's another major. It's a kind of rethinking of monitoring to provide you with sort of more insights into the unknown ideas. It empowers your teams to make decisions and empower them to take action. And why the ticket queues are such an important thing to focus in on is these queues have become a way that people have been running their life, right? That everything now is bouncing from ticket to ticket, from queue to queue, and you get a lot of poor handoffs, you get a lot of delays, you get a lot of interrupts. So we find just people focusing on looking at the ticket queues and saying, how do we get rid of those ticket queues, right? How do we put as much self-service as possible, or how do we rework our engineering pipelines to kind of remove the need to wait in one functional specialist to another functional specialty. And also because queues create what we call snowflakes, right? It's these, you do a lot of one-offs. You kind of jump in, you get a ticket, you do something, you go to the next ticket, you do something, the next ticket, you do something. You do a lot of one-offs that technically might be correct, but they're brittle, they're unreproducible. They cause a lot of problems throughout the organization, a lot of outages. So if just focusing in on how do we reduce the waiting and the interrupts caused by ticket queues, and then reduce the unreproducibility of the snowflakes that happen in ticket queues is a huge, 2 places that people really look for the toil they can get rid of. So easy to get started, track the toil levels for each team. It's not really time tracking per se, it's more just a general sense of how is each team doing over a given time period, usually monthly is what people look at. Set the toil limits, 50% is sort of the kind of canonical sort of number, but some people change that up or down. And then funding these toil reduction efforts, right? And making the case for that and really putting emphasis on the teams that are already over those limits. And some of the anti patterns they look for, right? doing with the queues, right? The do it, and do it again kind of phase, that instead of constantly interrupting people, which puts waiting on the person doing the interrupting, interruptions on the people being interrupted, and you're ignoring the work that has to get done. The whole self-service idea is, how do you encapsulate those operational ideas, push it out to other people? Same way with, trying to find all the places where people have the knowledge to do something, but they don't have the ability to connect to it, whether it be for security or compliance policies, figuring out how to put self and service into that to avoid the waiting and interruptions. Favorite one too is, what happens a lot is this: I'm an expert, I didn't read the wiki, right? Service has changed, use this flag or something bad's gonna happen, or we gotta pause the monitoring or we all get woken up. Next person rolls around at 3 in the morning, so they've done this a million times, I'm not gonna read the wiki, they just go and do it, and bad things happen. Again, another thing for self-service, being able to make people focus on updating the self-service, which then makes other people work quicker and not encounter all these self-inflicted wounds that are just more toil going into the system. And 2 quick examples here. It could also be a kind of a foundation for very strategic initiatives. The guys at Ticketmaster, this is Jody Mulkey, their former CTO at the DevOps Enterprise Summit also in 2015, talked about how they had a problem where their average MTTR for web-facing incidents was 47 minutes, right? So, when the Yankees can't print playoff tickets for 47 minutes, it's a big deal. And through basically looking to kind of put self-service and to extend the idea of self-service out to, it's called support at the edge. How do we turn operators into operators? How do we let developers build all the procedures to build and run their system and flow through the pipeline? It's a really remarkable story because in about 18 months, they got their MTTR down from 47 minutes to about 3.8 minutes, which is a 92% reduction in MTTR. And more importantly, they reduced the escalations by 50%, which is, again, more toil, right? More interruptions being pushed back at people. And they reduced their overall support costs by half. So altogether, by focusing on empowering people to take action, getting rid of those repetitive request queues, getting rid of the excessive toil, big organizational change. Another one, same thing at the DevOps Enterprise Summit, another great video to watch. Standard Chartered Bank, I won't go into the whole details, but by applying sort of a similar mentality, got to the point where they freed up about 28, in one year, they freed up 28 years, full-time FTEs from the work the repetitive manual work they had to do. Got rid of 13,000 operations tasks that they had to previously review every time something happened. And by their estimations, probably avoided about 200 self-inflicted customer impacting events. So from simple ideas like let's focus on reducing toil, let's focus on reducing the waiting and the interruptions, standardize how we do things, they built these kind of 2 big strategic initiatives that really saved them a lot. Oops, sorry, don't have a button I'm pushing here. And where I need your help, so my colleagues, this is not really a Rundeck thing, but it's under the Rundeck banner. We've been working on documenting this self-service operations design pattern that we see more of these companies applying time and time again. And you can read it for free online. There's no registration or anything like that. And if you have any feedback or stories you want to share, we're looking to add that in. So recap, SRE is more than a title. SRE is really about a new way to think about operations work. Really understand the error budgets and toil limits because that is the real genius and I think the real power, what SRE brings to the world, even if you don't want to call what you're doing SRE. Be practical. I think start focusing on the toil as soon as possible as a way to get these ideas working and really to move the needle in your organization. Find and fix those toil anti-patterns, and then you can apply the self-service operations design pattern wherever you aren't getting success by kind of re-engineering the work. And that's it. Okay.
All right, any questions? We got one in the back. I'm on my way.
Oh, sorry.
Can you elaborate on observability and any tools you can suggest?
I think there's a different, Splunk would say they're an observability tool. Honeycomb.
I support that.
Yeah, honeycomb.io is another one that kind of really pushing the observability idea. But the idea is, from my understanding, monitoring tools are about knowing past problems. So I know there's a threshold I don't want to blow, or I know there's some kind of pattern of facts that happened before, and I want to set kind of trap or set some kind of look for that. Where observability is more about collecting the metrics of all of your systems to try to find answers to the unknown problems. Like being able to more query things, query-based, to find out what's going on. Some people says transactions are slow. So many transactions feel slow. How can I query these tools to bring all my different metrics together to kind of make sense out of the matrix, right, that I'm seeing? That's my understanding of how the two kind of worlds line up, monitoring and observability. And I think that comes along with the SRE movement purely because it's people thinking about how do we improve our operations. And when you get out of that toil kind of driven firefighting mode, you get more time to focus on projects like that. Like how can we get ahead of the game? How can we build these systems to protect us so we aren't always falling back into that toil state?
Awesome. Thank you. There we go.
Thanks. How do you realistically measure toil in your job and make your measurements believable?
The best ones I've seen is just people, this team by team. Somebody on the team, like a scrum master kind of role, just somebody is there to it's mostly interview based, right? I've seen people try to do it with time tracking, but it just gets to be so onerous and it's not that much more accurate than just asking somebody at the end of the week or having them fill out a little kind of web survey. But yeah, usually it's through just kind of interview type discussion. Because again, it's not trying to be an exact science. It's just trying to get a sense for which teams are drowning and which teams have an extra capacity to succeed. Because operations is generally a pretty proud bunch, right? They don't like to admit that they're that things are getting out of control. So it's really just to kind of put a safeguard on their capacity, right? If that makes sense.
Common HR measurements are burnout and attrition.
That's true. I mean, the toil thing actually does lead to often higher burnout because it feels like you're on that hamster wheel, right? It's not even the long hours. It's just like I'm in this state of reaction all the time. And that can be very emotionally burdensome, especially people who care about, how they have professional pride, right? You want things to be better.
Yeah, and I highly suspect that in the next year you're going to see a talk or two related to this and burnout and all, because it's also a topic that it's on my list that we're going to get covered at one of these events. Because it's the toil that leads to that. I mentioned about firefighting, and when talking about this, one thing that's important to note that firefighters are not fighting massive fires all the time. If they did, their fatality rate would start skyrocketing, and the number of people wanting to do the job would start dropping dramatically. So toil kind of fits in that as well.
Yeah, and it's kind of the interesting part of it is you can focus on the opposite of it, which is, well, why do I want to reduce toil? Because I want more engineering work. I want to get more done. Who doesn't want to get more done, right? Yeah. Same way with the burnout thing. If you focus on the opposite side of burnout, it's really high performance. So you've got these thoroughbreds. These are all our people that work in our organization. And this is our talent. We've invested in them. They're our most expensive asset we have. The burnout conversation sometimes tends towards people like, well, what am I, running a country club? Right? I have to be nice to people. What's this all about, right? But if you look at it as, no, these are your most expensive assets, the opposite of burnout is flourishing. The opposite of burnout is high performance. So let's just take all those burnout cues, like your loss of agency or the loss of the feeling like you're overwhelmed, and just turn it the other way around. You're in control. You feel like you got enough time to do what you need to do, and that equals high performance. And the toil way is a great way to start in on that, because you can make the argument that we're just taking money outside and lighting it on fire if our people are doing nothing but running around firefighting all the time, because we aren't getting all of that human capital out of our best people, right?
All right, Damon Edwards, everyone.
Thank you.